you're going to be chatting with. So I understand you guys talked about that a little bit in school already?
Yes.
So, not sure, did we want to start with questions, or should I start with talking a little bit about what I've done?
What you've done.
So, alright then, we'll get started with, I guess, a little bit about what I've done then. So I went to school to study paleontology. So I actually went to University of Michigan, and I spent a lot of time there learning about ancient animals and how to find them and what to do with their bones once you have found them. Spent a lot of time working in their laboratory there, putting back fossil skeletons together, especially fossil whales. So I actually got to work with whales that still had feet. So a long time ago, whales were still land animals that walked around on the land and only went swimming once in a while, and they still had legs back then. So I actually spent a lot of time reconstructing skeletons of whales, their legs, and trying to figure out, how did they use these legs when they used to have them, and how did those legs end up disappearing? What happened to those legs? So we went through many different skeletons and got to see through time that the legs kept getting smaller and smaller, and the tail kept getting wider and wider. It was pretty interesting to see that transition. So that's one of the cool things I did at University of Michigan. Does anyone like Michigan?
Yes.
Go green, go white.
Go green.
So after I went to college there, I ended up going out in grad school out on the East Coast at a university called Stony Brook. And there I started, instead of studying whales, I learned more about primates. So all sorts of things, lemurs, monkeys, apes, people. I studied the fossils of all sorts of things that kind of are more closely related to us. So it was interesting. I did a lot of work on trying to figure out also how primates use their arms and their legs. When you're a paleontologist, you kind of specialize in one area usually. You either specialize in a certain type of animal or plant, or you can actually concentrate on a certain part of the body. So I concentrated on how different animals used their arms and legs, and so I could use that with learning about whales or learning about primates or learning about horses, which I did a little bit of work with too. And in that sense, you kind of become the only expert in that one area. That's the best way if you want to get into paleontology, is to kind of find your little niche. You want to find what you think is the most interesting and just learn everything you can about that. So when anyone has a question about it, they come to you. So you get to be the important person answering the questions about that particular topic. Now, I've been out on paleontology digs several times, and when I went to dig up fossils, it was always out in the Badlands in Wyoming. And there it is quite hot. A lot of places you go to dig up fossils are pretty hot places. Occasionally you get the opposite. There are some people that do fossil hunting up near the North Pole, which can be very cold, obviously, or in Antarctica. But most of the time you end up someplace that's a nice desert, and it's very, very hot, so you have to dress accordingly. Unfortunately, what that actually means is that you have to wear long sleeves and long pants, and you wear these big floppy hats because you're trying to protect yourself from the sun. So even though it's like 115 degrees outside, you cover up your whole body because you got to protect yourself from the sun. And you got to troop around. I got my boots too. The lovely, lovely boots that you get to wear, walk all over the place, and try not to fall off of cliffs. Occasionally, you do fall off of things like that. It's just part of the job. So if you're interested in paleontology, you also need to be a little bit of an adventurer. You have to not be afraid of going out into the middle of really nowhere. You're miles and miles from civilization and just living out there. Let's see, I got a couple pictures of that I can show you guys. I'm not sure. Teachers, is it alright if I share my screen?
Think so?
That's fine.
Alright. So let me show you guys where I went digging for fossils, because it's kind of more cool to see the pictures than to just hear me talk about it and look at my face. So let's see here. One before on this version of Skype, so we're going to see if this comes through. And it says I need premium Skype. Continue with the free call. Start sharing the screen. Let's see if this works.
There we go.
Yep.
Oh, excellent. All right, so like I said, Wyoming, that's where I was. And at the time that I was digging up things in Wyoming, it was about 55 million years ago. That's the age of rock we were looking in. So do you guys know when the big dinosaur extinction happened?
Yeah. 5 million.
Probably.
Years ago. So this was almost 10 million years later. So that meant we weren't really finding many dinosaur things. Occasionally we would stumble across something, but mostly we were looking for mammals. So we were trying to find all the things that survived that big asteroid impact and see what did they look like. And we found out that they were pretty small, mostly. Most of the things there were pretty small, and this was the environment they lived in. Even though we were in Wyoming, back then it was a rainforest.
Whoa.
Today, though, it looked like this. Up on top of all the rocks. So, hiking pretty far up, this is what I mean about being a bit of an adventurer. There's no safety rails, there are no trails. You just go out into the middle of the Badlands and start going up these cliffs and hope that you don't fall off of them. Sometimes you gotta go pretty high. The problem with this is that not only are you going high up, the ground is made of all these very loose stones, so it's very easy to slip. It's like trying to hike on top of marbles, and you don't want to slip because, again, there are cliffs. You might fall down one. I did fall down one once, and somehow didn't manage to break anything. I was really bruised up, though. It was pretty painful. So I feel like most people that have been out there have fallen down a cliff at least once or twice. And that's how you learn to be careful. This is the kind of area you're hiking around in. And you have to camp. You're not going to be staying in a hotel, so you stay in tents. And this is not a campground. This is really just the middle of the desert, and you just plop your tent up, and there you are. So you have to bring everything you need with you. This is me in my tent, and that's all my stuff. So me and all that stuff went into that little tiny tent.
Wow. How did you fit in that? That's really small.
I spend a lot of time in there.
Yeah, that's a really small place.
And I had to hang most of it in bags because all the wildlife would come in and all the tiny mice and things would try to get in our food. Well, we'd cook outside, tank of water. And what we did at the end of the day, we sat down and cataloged all the fossils. So you just spent 10 hours walking around in the glaring sunshine, and you're not done. You got to go back, wrap all the fossils up, and record them so that you know what you found. What you had to do is you had to prepare for dust storms because there's a lot of dust storms out there. So we tried to keep the tents tarped down so the dust wouldn't get in and hurt the fossils or the electronics. But still would get these dust storms, and they'd block out the sky, and eventually the dust storms got in the tents anyway. So, it can be kind of dangerous out there. You never know when the dust devils are going to pop up. But we drive around in these things. One of our vehicles, this was called Dino, and our other car is Bam Bam. And so those were our transportation, and the problem is, again, you're in the middle of nowhere, so sometimes you get stuck. You end up having to dig yourself out. You get flat tires, and you gotta fix those. There's cows in the road. We were actually in the land of cowboys, which was kind of cool. Like, there are real cowboys riding around, herding these cows around, but sometimes they would herd them straight through our pathway. So, that was annoying. And there are other animals you have to deal with.
That's just scary.
About 3 inches long, and it actually went up my friend's pants. This is a scorpion that I found underneath my tent. My tent, apparently it had lived under there the whole summer. I didn't know that. Find some other things. The amphibians come out because rain is so very rare out in the desert that most of the time the amphibians hide away and they don't come out. Sometimes if you had a rainy day, you'd start seeing the frogs and the toads. You could usually find lizards.
Oh, that's a
on my head here.
It's on your hat.
There are a lot of big spiders.
Yay, spider. Deer. Let's eat some deer. Yeah, that's so.
And this is a rattlesnake.
Awesome.
Now that snake's hair in front of it on the ground, that's where I had stopped a second before I took that picture. I didn't know the snake was there. So I stepped down and it started rattling and I had to jump backwards to get out of the way. And that happens a lot. You are in rattlesnake country and you usually would see a rattlesnake or two most every week, if not more, almost every day sometimes. And you just had to be really careful. You wore boots that had pretty high tops, so if the snake tried to bite you, hopefully it bites your boot instead. And otherwise, you just watch out and hope that you don't get bit, because the nearest hospital is a long way away. Alright, so I'm going to show you guys how to find fossils. And then maybe we can do some questions. You have to go hunting around and looking at the ground. And what we were looking for, again, were things that were not dinosaurs. They're the things just after the dinosaurs. So they're very, very tiny. So you have to look really, really well at the ground. Unfortunately, the fossils also match the color of the ground. So if I zoom in, that's what the fossil is. So that's what we got out of the ground there. Now that's one of the bigger fossils. Sometimes the fossils are even tinier. So I can zoom in. Tiny little fossil. And that right there is a tooth. That's a tooth from an ancient animal. Very, very tiny. You have to have very good eyes. And you put it in a little capsule. You mark it. And then you actually tie it up with a ribbon and bury it back in the spot where you found it so that our GPS locator can come around and map exactly where we found it. And you do this over and over again finding more and more teeth, more and more things all day long. And once you found a good number, then you bring the GPS locator around and you mark where each one was found. Oh yeah. It's also something you gotta do sometimes. Sometimes the fossil you find is really dirty, so you have to clean it off with your mouth. You're in the desert and you don't want to waste water, so you can't use your drinking water on that, so you just got to use your spit. So here's all of these fossils at the end of the day, and we'll mark around and map them, and then we get to go home. So here's some of the animals we found. There's this guy here, which is an ancient crocodile, Alegnathosuchus. Here's one of his teeth. He also had these weird flat teeth that he used to crush shells. So he didn't have a mouthful of completely sharp teeth like most alligators and crocodiles do today. That was interesting. And here are the ancient horses. These are the size of cats.
Oh.
But I'm good at finding. I don't know why. Everyone seemed really good at finding a certain type of fossil. I was really good at finding the horses. So here's one of their teeth. Here's a tooth that's stuck in a jawbone, and it's just erupting out of the jawbone, which means this is from a baby horse. That was its adult tooth growing in. And here's a pile of horse.
Oh.
The skeleton of 3 different horses. I found a horse graveyard one day, essentially. It was pretty cool. I spent the whole day clearing it out of all the fossils I could find. Tons of teeth, lots of jawbones, and these are knees. These are horse knees. Take this one we call the tube rabbit. Rabbit is Diacrodexus, and you can find teeth of them. Sometimes you would find yourself a whole jaw full of teeth, which is pretty exciting. But you probably noticed that we're only finding bits and pieces. It's not like we're able to find a full skeleton laid out in the ground really pretty. That doesn't actually happen in real life. Sometimes see that in movies, but usually in real life, you just find bits and pieces. So for this animal, I only found one piece. We found one tooth the whole summer we were out there. That was it. Now this is my favorite one because this is actually a new species that I found. So I actually got to find a brand new species, and it's a carnivore. It would have been about the size of a raccoon. These are all the pieces of its skeleton that I found. Lots and lots of pieces. And that was probably the most exciting thing I found. This is Cryphodon, big giant hippo thing, so this is actually a big guy. That's my friend George. He's holding up the elbow of the Coryphodon hippo. But the problem with finding the big stuff is then you gotta use a lot of bags, and you gotta take a lot of time to clean it all, which is annoying. But exciting, because then you get to say that you found something really big. And this is the tiniest thing we found. This is the last one I'll show you. This is Tyhardina, which is a primate, which was the whole reason I was out there, to look for these primates. And this thing was about the size of your pinky finger. So trying to find pieces of this was difficult. Because it's so tiny. But I did manage to find 2 teeth. And those are the size of its 2 teeth. That's its jaw. Save. Get my video back up. screen sharing. Do I have a video yet? Let's see.
And a tiny small one. Small one.
Small video. Stop. How about that one?
Yeah. Back to normal.
Alright, so I'm curious to see if you guys have any questions now that you know a little bit more about what to do. I'll let your teachers select who has questions, if anyone has questions.
So say your name, just Mackenzie. So just say your first name and then
I'm Mackenzie, and I wanted to know, like, what kind of, what kind of animals have you discovered? Like, have you discovered a zebra?
So I haven't discovered a zebra, but I found the ancestor of the zebra. So my specialty with those early horses, for some reason, I was just really good at finding those very early horse bones. And those horses, we call them horses, but they didn't really look much like horses. They ended up giving rise to zebras, to donkeys, to modern day horses, to ponies, to all that whole family of animals came from those very early horses. And that was one of the things I was really good at finding, even though I didn't study them very much. For some reason, I just kept finding them.
Like, did you find all the parts to any of the horses? Or?
Did I find all the parts? I wish I did. I found, I'd say about 60 to 70% of a skeleton. So not the whole skeleton, but most of the skeleton.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Why do you like this job?
Why do I like this job? Why wouldn't I like this job? It's awesome. You get to do cool science all the time and learn new things and find new things. You get to spend a lot of time outside. You get to go adventuring and exploring. And I also, in my job at the Museum of Science, I get to work a lot with schools and kids. So I actually get to go visit classrooms and do science experiments for classrooms. And that's also really fun because if you guys have ever gotten to do science experiments in school, it's always a good day when you get to do a science experiment. So I get to do that all the time.
Thank you.
Welcome.
My name is Nathan, and where do you find the most fossils?
Where do you find the most fossils? So I found the most fossils when I was down in this one divot when I was out west in the Badlands. But in general, people find fossils usually in an area that's really dry, where the wind has pushed a lot of the rocks and the sand off the surface, so we've had a lot of eroding. That usually happens in the desert, where there's a lot of wind and there's not a lot of trees to block the wind. So over time, the fossils that are in the ground slowly get uncovered just because the wind pushes so hard to the ground and keeps taking bits of dust off the top until you have bits of fossils poking out. And that's kind of nice because then every year when you go back, you might have a new fossil sticking out of the ground that you couldn't see last year.
Thank you.
Welcome.
James.
My name's James, and what kind of tools do you use?
And all sorts of tools. One of the best tools, though, is this guy. So this is your rock pick and your hammer, and you can hammer rocks open. If you think there's something in there, you can spike things open and crack open rocks this way too. And you can also even use this end to dig. So sometimes I would use this to dig up because you don't want to use a giant shovel with a huge end. You might break something, but since this gets so skinny at the end, you can carefully dig around with it. That's my favorite tool. You got to use a lot of different tools. You use a lot of magnifying glasses. You use paintbrushes to brush things away. And you always have to have a pocket knife. Never go out on your dig without a pocket knife because you don't know when you're going to need it for whatever reason. You're out in the middle of nowhere.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, well, we're pretty much out of time here. Can we tell her thank you?
Thank you. You're welcome. If you have any more questions, you can email them to me.
Okay. We're all set?
Bye.